All right, folks, today what we're going to be working on is we've got this 14-bolt rear truck axle on this GM K2500. And as you can see, we've got a weepage problem. It's not a leak per se. We don't have any actual leakage. So this is the kind of problem that you can ignore and let go for a while. But at some point, you got to get in here and deal with it, right? So the problem is, normally the fluid level is right about here. And normally you'd see this kind of weeping around the bolt holes or even around the seams level with that. But we also have it going all the way around the perimeter. So this is an indication that we've got multiple areas of the gasket that have failed. One of the things you want to watch for on here, the cover itself can tend to get a lot of corrosion on it. Originally from the factory it would have been painted black, but over the decades you end up getting a lot of pitting. This is in the south. This is going to be a lot worse if you're in the salt belt up north. What you want to look for, though, is if you have this kind of weepage in this bulge area around the cover, then the cover is going to have to be replaced as well as the gasket, because that means you've got perforation from the corrosion working its way right through the cover. What we've got here, though, I think is just a straight-up gasket. We'll take it off and check it out to be sure. Like you can see here, we've got 14 13-millimeter bolts that we're going to have to pull to get this off. One of the things we're going to look at also on this is, since we do have this kind of weepage along the top, and I'll show you in a minute that there's a little bit of weepage actually at the fill plug itself, we're going to check and make sure that our vent pipe is okay, because if we got excess pressure in here, that can sometimes result in what we're seeing. So the top of the vent hose, hopefully this will allow you to see it, this little mirror, comes in and gets clamped to a connector on top of the axle. So we can see in this view here, that's him, right? And so now we know we have the hose, and now we can follow the hose. It goes up here. There's a bracket along with the brake lines that holds it, and then it goes up around here. And then at least on this particular truck model, most of them should be similar. It goes up to this other bracket for the brake line, and then you can see at the very top of the hose, there is a little one-way relief valve. So this will let air out, but not let water in when you're going off-road. So you want to make sure the hose is there, it's clamped down, it's not broken, cracked, and it's not missing this little guy that's plugged into the top. That can also indicate a problem for what we're seeing. But since it looks okay, it's most likely the gasket. So we'll go ahead and get it off, and we'll determine if that's the case. So I'm not necessarily going to have you sit here and watch me pull all of these 13s off. Let me go ahead and get those going, and we'll come back right before we're ready to break the seal. All right, guys, looking at the back of the axle and the differential here, here's the fill plug, and you can see that there's just a little bit of moisture back here. We don't have any, heavy wetness or anything coming from this, and of course we don't have anything coming and spilling over from the seal in the front here either. So this is strictly a rear gasket problem. So let's go ahead and get going on removing it. All right, guys, we've just got the bolts almost all the way out. I'm just kind of showing you here. This one, just breaking the torque resulted in some leakage. The others aren't leaking at all. This one's just finally starting to weep a little bit. This one's doing a little bit only after it's nearly completely removed. So, part of this tells me right here that, we've got definitely a breakage in the gasket right there, because just turning it one time and breaking the torque shouldn't result in all this leakage that's coming out. It should be more like this or this. So we're going to go ahead and start pulling these off, except for a couple. We'll come back when we get ready to remove the cover. All right, guys, we've pulled all the bolts except for one at the top. You can leave one or two at the top just to keep the cover on until you get everything drained. We've organized the bolts in the order they came off, and we've marked this as our index nut, our index bolt. It's just a good idea to kind of put them back in the way they came out, just in case that there's any variances with the amount of time this has been, sealed up. This particular truck's rear end has not been changed since the first 5,000-mile break-in fluid was required back when it was new. So it's going to be pretty putrid when you start to get this off. So if you got a weak stomach, just keep that in mind. What we're going to try to do now is we're just going to try and see if we can find a weak spot where we can begin to break the seal. We want to be very careful because we do not want to get any kind of bending on this, because that'll end up having us to have to change the cover anyway. She can be pretty welded on after this many years. Never ceases to amaze me that you can end up with leaks, you know, when stuff is so tightly bound after many decades together. We just want to get a little bit of a break in it so that we can get the fluid to start draining out. And then we'll be able to let it sit for a while and do that. Once you get one weak point, it'll start to slowly give way, as you can see here. The other thing I'm trying to do is I'm trying to preserve most of the gasket around the other side, just so I can see how it failed. Yes, it's pretty foul smelling, that's for sure. All right, there we go. And you can just slowly prise it up. Adjust your pan if you need to. At this point, she's free. And the only thing holding her on is the one bolt that we left at the top. All right, so we will let it drain out here for a little bit until the steady streams stop, and then we'll take the last bolt off and we'll remove it, and we'll see what we see on the inside and on the inside of the cover as well as the inside of the differential. All right, we've taken that top bolt off so that we can pull this down. You know, watch the bracket for the brake lines and all that, just so you don't scrape off any crud into the inside. We're just going to work this guy off. So as we look at this, you know, we tried to kind of preserve our gasket around these holes, just so we might be able to see if we see anything that clues us in, but don't really see any evidence of any cracking. But we can see, for example, the fluid had reached the bolt hole here. Here, you know, this is all kind of like normal penetration. But since the gasket fragmented, you know, we can't really tell if it had oozed up past it. But neither here nor there. We'll clean this off of the inside surface here. We've got a little bit of some of this crud that got on top of our ring gear here. We want to clean that off as well. And then we'll also clean out on the bottom here. We'll check the... I think there's a magnet in here. We'll check that as well. And then we'll go ahead and do the same on the pan. Clean the gasket material off, and we'll get a straight edge, and we'll make sure our pan is not warped or any damage like that that might be contributing to this problem. And then we'll put it back together, and I'll go over some of the fluid options. All right, guys, I wanted to show you a different type of axle content here. Let me get my flashlight in a position. So this is the exact same 14 bolt 9.5-inch rear on a Suburban. This particular Suburban has a RPO G80 locking differential. So you can see the differential inside the axle is different than the open type that we're working on with most of the clips in this video. So I just wanted to make sure that you saw the two different types. You can also see we have this rear sway bar that kind of obstructs our working area that's going to be present on the Suburban models. And also we're going to have the gas tank in a much more awkward position for the work that we're doing, but there's still plenty of room to get on here and do what you need to do. So if I can get the camera up under here, show you, you have basically the exact same setup, right? The exact same brake line and vent line clip there, the exact same brake line clip over here. It's identical except for the contents that are inside. They also get exactly the same type of fluid. These locking rear ends do not get limited slip friction modifiers added. Those are for cars. So if you have a G80 truck, it just gets the same thing as the open. So you can see one of two types when you're doing this particular job. All right, guys, just an update here to show you. So we've got most of the gasket material removed off. I left a little bit here just to show you the technique. What I like to do is I just come in here with a traditional gasket scraper, since we're working with steel. Can get this, normally with these halves, a little beveled edge. If we zoom in there, right, there's a little beveled edge to these, right? So we'll position that underneath and then just take some kind of small hammer, just lots of small quick taps. Make a couple of passes. And then when you get most of the material off, then you can switch to a carbide scraper. You can get the rest of the gasket material that tends to want to hang around the bolt holes off. Just want to be careful that you're not gouging and getting caught and creating any deep grooves or anything. Lots of fine scratches is actually what you're looking for. Just like that. So we'll have to work on these two to get this dried up material. If we zoom in here, that we can see that's kind of hardened around these two bolts, and we want it to look like this one here. And then after we get done with that, we'll run a pipe cleaner through the threads. We'll blow them out with compressed air. And then what we'll do is we'll come over with a composite type of sander. Something like this. And we'll be working that all the way around the perimeter. And then when we get done with that, we'll run some solvent like brake clean just around the perimeter where the gasket's going to be, so that we have a nice dry surface. The other thing that we've done is we've gone in here, we've cleaned off the magnet. We don't really have anything of concern there, just kind of fine dust type material. And we've cleaned off with a rag with solvent all along this area here. We'll do that again just before we put the gasket on. The only reason we're doing that is just so that none of the fluid, the gear oil leaks out onto the mating surface until we're all done and torqued down. Some people like to spray solvent up around the gears themselves, but I don't. I don't think that's a good idea. Just kind of leave it the way it is. Watch the teeth to see if you got any crud that has accumulated when you're cleaning up on the top. A good idea is to take a clean paper towel, put it up on top of the ring gear, work it up on top, both sides, kind of wedge it in there, and then as you're scraping up here, it'll just tend to hit the rag and fall down. Anything gets caught up in the top part here, you can easily just come by like this and get it all out. Let's take a look at how the cover is coming along. All right, guys, so we've taken a small wire brush, and we've gotten the dried up dirt and dried up grease off the outside. You can still see some of the paint is evident here. We're not trying to do a cosmetic restoration. You know, if you want, you can sand all this down and repaint it, but we're just after a functional repair. Inside, we can see the fluid level over the years. So obviously, this is the top, this is the bottom. This is the degree to which you need to clean it. You don't need to worry about getting all that off. I left a little bit of the original American axle manufacturing gasket on here. We'll see that the replacement is this same GM division type when we get to that point. Very similar to the rear end itself. We'll use a gasket scraper and a small tool like this hammer. We'll take this beveled end, get it underneath the old gasket material. Just kind of get the majority of it off like that. And then again, with a carbide scraper, you can come in and work on the small stuff. What we're wanting to do, get some of this outer rust off. This is really just cosmetic, but you're mostly after what accumulates around the bolt holes. So we just very carefully use the the carbide scraper to work the old gasket material off, because we don't want to cause any gouges in the metal, which could mean little tiny passages that the gear oil will want to navigate through and try to find its way out to escape staying in the rear end. As we do this, you can begin to see the metal around the bolt hole appear. That tells you that you're working your way through this gasket material and starting to get to the bare steel, which is a good indication you want to go slower and softer. But you can kind of see, right? You see the metal, you see the rust, and then the gray area is the original gasket material. So we're just going to continue to do that on these last three, just like we've done these others. We'll use a small pipe brush to clean out the inside, and then very similar to what I briefly showed on the rear end itself, we'll take a composite sanding disc and we'll go around lightly, very lightly. We're not trying to take a lot of material off. It's going to be normal to see these low spots like this that have corrosion compared to the high spots. What we want to make sure of, though, is that we don't have drastically low spots. And let me show you a check between bolt holes that we can do for that. All right, so what we're looking for, sometimes when you try to remove these covers, you can bend them. And what we want to do is we want to take a straight edge along several of the corners, and we want to use that to check that between any three bolt holes, we don't have large gaps, right? So we can see on the outer side here, we have no gaps. We do have a low spot if you look at under that number 4, but we don't have it on the outside, so that's good. Same thing on these three, right? We don't have any low spots at all. These three, we don't have any low spots at all. You know, just kind of keep going around like that and checking it. If we take a look, for example, on those that we haven't finished yet, those holes that still have some gasket material, we can even see there that it's just a very, very small gap, right? So technically, you know, you don't even have to really get every bit of this off, but you definitely want to get it to where you don't see any large gaps. I like to take it down to where I can see bare steel around each bolt hole, but I don't worry too much about these low spots that might appear. That's kind of just normal in the metal. As long as I can see that the outer perimeter I can get bare steel, then I know it's not going to leak, right? So I'll sand and work on that until I see it. But if I don't, I would replace the cover. Like we said earlier in the video, if I've got perforation where I'm leaking through the cover, and you'll see that after you get it clean like this, then you can replace the cover if you have that problem as well. And similarly, if you find a situation where this test fails and you're not able to correct it by putting it, for example, in a vise and trying to reflatten it, then that's another reason why you might want to replace the cover itself. So I'm going to continue cleaning this up so that we can get it put back together, show you the gasket, the part number, and the correct gear fluid. All right, guys, we're ready to put this back on and get it refilled. So again, here's a view of the outside. We've got it cleaned up. Again, not trying to do a restoration, just a functional repair. So we're just going to leave the natural patina of our cosmetic corrosion there. Here you can see, here's the lower where it stayed clean. Here's the upper where it got stained on the metal. You could clean this if you want, but there's no need. Here we've gotten this finished all the way around the edge. Again, I'm not after a perfect pristine finish. I'm after a complete smooth finish that's going to be leak-free. This particular type of axle, this 14-bolt 9.5 rear end from American Axle and Manufacturing, which is a former division of GM, is going to get a gasket, not RTV, and that part number is 26063649. This is before the days of RTV using for rear ends. They used actual gasket of a composite material, and you can see it still says American Axle and Manufacturing, just like our old one that came off from 24 years ago. Let's go ahead and take a look underneath how we've got that end prepared, and then let's put it back together. All right, folks, and this is how the rear axle looks when we're all done. And again, you know, we're just after a functional no leak finish. So we're going to see a little bit of corrosion and low spots here and there, and that's okay. The gasket will take care of that. Now, also while you're in here, you know, it's a good chance, like I said before, checking the magnet down here for any small particles and cleaning that off of metal, but we're also looking for any large pieces of metal, which would indicate we have something else we need to chase up here. We didn't have that, but it's a good idea to check out the gears, check out to see if you see any damage visually. If you don't have any noise and you don't have any strange vibrations, this is just a routine gasket change and gear oil change, but it's a good idea to watch it and check it out while you're in here. All right, so let's get this guy back together. So we've gone ahead and we've positioned our gasket on top of the cover. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get a couple of bolts to hold him in position. I guess I'm going to have to reposition the camera here so I can get directly in front of the rear end for a moment. All right, let's get this guy in position. We're just going to keep everything kind of very lightly lined up until we can get a couple of these bolts started by hand. Just going to get a couple on this side. And really, you can just go all the way around. Just don't forget that some of them have these brackets that are part of them, like this guy here. You'll have to position in as you go. So I'm just going to keep going around the perimeter, putting these in by hand. We'll come back and torque them down. All right, guys, as you go put these back in, a couple of things you want to take note of. You want to use the witness marks, which are the wear marks on the cover from where the bolts were previously, to make sure you've got this shifted in position. You also want to make sure that you're seeing the gasket through some of these cutouts right here so we can see it protruding, right? So as we finger tighten these as we go around, that'll help make sure that we've got this sitting exactly where it was before. And then we'll just continue to go around and snug it up. There's not a particular pattern, but I do like to alternate left to right, left to right, left to right, just kind of snugging it down, making sure that we've got all of these witness marks right back where they were originally. We'll come back in a moment and torque things down. All right, guys, it's 20 foot-pounds on these fasteners. Just using a 3/8 torque wrench to do that. Basically what I do is I just kind of alternate every other one. and then go to the other side. I've done all these once, but just going to make a second pass here, and then we'll flip around to the other side, and we'll fill her up. All right, let's take a look at some of the maintenance advice you see in the owner's manual for these rear ends. So a locking differential, drain and refill at the first engine oil change. This is when the vehicle's brand new. And then after that, just top it off. Standard differential, just check and top it off, right? This is for short trip city maintenance schedules. And again, this is the original owner's manual guidance. So not something that you need to regularly visit on these 14-inch 9.5 rear ends. If you go the long trip highway version, very similar. Locking, drain and refill at the first engine oil change, then top it off for the rest of the vehicle's life. Standard, just keep it topped off and check it every oil change for the rest of the vehicle's life. So there's really no straight up maintenance on this. The only time you ever have to do anything is when you get it leaking and the gasket fails, like we just had in this video. So a couple other things I'll show you in here. So when you take a look at the owner's manual, they highlight in the section on the different types of lubricants, they highlight the part number at the time that you would use for the differential. Same as the front and the rear. It's this 105-2271. 80W90 GL5. Now just take note of that, and we'll come back to that in a minute, but that's the number at the time the vehicle was new that they were recommending. If we take a look at a shot from the service manual, again, similarly, so this is just a page out of the service manual, whether this is for the locking, but it's the same for the non-locking too. Again, they highlight this GL5 rated 80W90 as the type of lubricant that you should be using. If we take a look at the capacity of the lubricant, and again, we're doing this video on the 14 bolt 9.5, it's 2.7 quarts. So that's how much of that 80W90 is going to go in there. Now, some other things about the lubricants, when you take a look, for example, like the GM parts catalog, that old number, that old 105-2271 was replaced by this number, 890-21671. And that first number that was in the owner's manual came out in 1994, and this one replaced it in 2004. So that's an AC Delco 10452. You can see in the old catalog, this catalog's from a few years ago from AC Delco, the same weight. The only difference is one's GL4 and one's GL5. This particular number is what you would normally use, and that product looks like this, right? So this is what that would look like. 890-21671. The later versions of this, before it got discontinued, would say AC Delco, and it'd be a bright blue and red kind of label, and it would have an AC Delco 104052 number on it. But this is just straight up GL4 conventional axle oil, and that's what was supposed to be put in here. If you had used it on a different vehicle that had a limited slip ran rather than locking, you would add an additive to it. So this became unobtainium a few years ago. It just that GM and AC Delco, for whatever reason, discontinued it. You can't find GL4 lubricants anywhere. So what we're going to be using in this video is the other one that is still available, the GL5. The GL5 specification of this is what matches what's in the service manual. It's even what matches what's in the owner's manual, even though the part numbers don't match. So I'm not really sure why GM, said this, but actually only had this available, because back in the day when these trucks were new, you couldn't buy a GL5 from GM or AC Delco for them. But eventually, this is all you have available now. So this is what we're going to be using, and it looks like this. Right? And this is the later kind of packaging. And you could have gotten the other one with GL4 and the 4052 version up until a few years ago, and it just got discontinued a few years ago. Now this one paradoxically tells you that it's for use in cars only and not for use in trucks. Just remember that's because most trucks from the 1999 pickups with the GMT 800s, the new body style all the way forward, we're using a 75 weight synthetic. And this 80W90 is not something that would have been in trucks for the last 20 years. So that's what that kind of labeling's for. It's not like it's going to cause some problem to your vehicle if you put it in there. Now, a few comments about going with this. I pulled this service bulletin for folks that might be concerned about not, sticking with that GL4. This is from 1999, and it covered all the CK and G and P trucks from the range that we're talking about here with the old body style, including the 99 Escalade. It would have also included the 2000 carryovers on those as well. And what's important here is not necessarily all these VIN cutoffs, but what they talked about was that they were recommending at the time that synthetic gear oil would attack the RTV sealant that was used in the rear ends of some of these CK trucks. So they were saying to only use the non-synthetic 105-2271 in those axles. And that's probably where the GL4, GL5 difference came from. That's just speculation on my part tying into this and similar and bulletins. And what they were telling you here, American Axle and Manufacturing, who makes the 14-bolt 9.5 rear we're using in this video, has gone ahead and said it's okay to use the 7590 as long as these kind of conditions are met. And if we look at the 9.5-inch axles, there's a VIN cutoff up above, but it corresponds to this point in time. And if you got the version that uses a cover with a gasket, which is what we've got, then if you wanted to, you could use the synthetic lubricant at the time, right? So what all that means is we're fine using that GL5 lubricant. A couple other notes from the service bulletin worth pointing out. You don't need to spray out the old lubricant, so they definitely don't recommend you go spraying brake clean all over the spider gears or the locking mechanism if you have a G80. Just want to get the debris off the magnet at the bottom and any kind of debris that's on the bottom of the housing. And then, of course, do not use a limited slip additive if you've got an RPO G80 truck rear end. So hope this kind of information helps you out. Let's go ahead and continue with the repair. All right, guys, now we're going to take the fill plug off. It's just a pipe end with a 3/8 cutout on the end of it, so you can just use a standard 3/8. I guess our flashlight is giving us some problems. Go ahead and pull this off, then we'll switch to another flashlight since I guess the battery on this one is getting where it's almost out. So this is just a standard kind of pipe plug. There's no gasket on this particular type, and there's no sealant or any kind of Teflon tape or anything like that. Once we've got this open, we can add the fluid. But let me get another flashlight so you guys can see what I'm doing. All right, we got our flashlight back in business. So, where we picked up, we just took this filler plug off that has a standard square cutout that fits a regular 3/8 extension. And so the fluid we're going to be putting in here, or rather the gear lubricant, is this AC Delco 80W90 GL5. And like we showed earlier when we went through what's in the service manual and what's in the owner's manual, 80W90 is the correct viscosity for this particular era of axle. So this 9.5-inch 14-bolt rear, this is what it takes. I mentioned the other fluid that used to be specified was actually a GL4, but you can't get GL4 anymore. And if you're interested in GL4, I'll put a company that still makes this weight in GL4 that is pretty good if you want to go with that. But I'm fine putting the GL5 in here, which was the original specification to begin with. Now, the capacity for this particular one is 2.7 quarts. So we've got several of these on hand so that we can do that particular capacity. And all we're going to do is we're going to put it into this fill plug until it overflows. There's really nothing more to it than that. I'm not going to sit here and have you guys watch all of these, but we'll load up the first couple of these, and then when I get to the last one, we'll come back and we'll show how we tell when it's full. All right, guys, after you go through 3 of these and you're on your 4th one, you want to go a lot slower because it's going to be on this one that she gets full. And so what we're watching for is it'll start to overflow out of the fill plug. You see right there, we're starting to get it oozing out of the fill plug. See if we can get a little bit more in here. Nope, that's it. Okay, so at that point, it's almost empty. Just kind of let the excess run back into the container. Get that guy up so you can run back in. And you can check this yourself with your finger. Let's clean this up a little bit. You can just take your finger. Make sure you got nothing on it, no dirt or anything. You can put it right back in here. You can make sure that you're sticking it in to the actual level. And then you can put this guy back on. Just get him going by hand first. And then take your 3/8 on a torque wrench set to 18 foot-pounds. And tighten them up. And that is it. Just that amount of torque there should be enough to have there be no leaks. Clean up the overflow, get some brake cleaner, spray it down, get the rest of it off, and the job is done. Take it for a test drive, check for leaks. I hope this helped you out. If you got questions, go ahead and leave a comment below, or you got comments on how we did this, I'll try to help out. If you found this useful or save you some money, hit that like button. And as always, thanks for watching.